So this week we're joined by Stewart Miller, who's the Chief Executive Officer of the Robotarium up in Scotland. Hi, Stewart.
Hi, Mark. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Very well, thanks.
Good, good. Can you tell us a little bit more about your role and what your organisation does?
Sure, yeah. Maybe I'll start with the organisation and then I'll talk a little bit about my role. So the National Robotarium has been running now for just over a year. We opened last September. And at the top level, our real aim is to try and help the whole of the UK. That's why we're called the National Robotarium. Help the whole of the UK get more out of robotics. And that tends to break down into 3 or 4 major areas. So the first area is helping businesses that think robotics might be something they want to use, to de-risk that transition, to understand not just the technology, but all the other things that go with a business as it adopts robotics. What does it mean for their existing staff? What does it mean in terms of costs? What does it mean in terms of safety? Are they really going to get out of that purchase and use of robotics what they really need? So we can kind of be an independent handholder in that respect, but we can also help people think more long term about what's their business going to look like in 5 years and in 10 years as they have more robotics than they have today in their businesses. And that's not just manufacturing, that's everything from agriculture to construction, healthcare. We're even looking at applications in space. We're looking at applications in manufacturing and logistics and more traditional things, but also things like in the nuclear industry. So that's a big part of what we do. And hopefully through the efforts we do in that area, the UK will use more robotics and there'll be an economic benefit to that, not just in terms of productivity for the companies, but also creation of new jobs and hopefully start to stimulate a UK manufacturing base for robotics. Sitting right alongside that is to try and encourage more money to go into research. So there's quite a lot of money goes into research and robotics at the moment, but tends to be at low TRL level, which is the nature of research. But obviously, it would be good if we had more of that going on. It'd be good if it was a little bit more coordinated as well, so that we could identify the areas where the UK can excel. So we're in that conversation as well. Right alongside that, and probably more linked to the first topic, is helping small businesses that want to start up in robotics, trying to get their foothold in robotics, be successful. So we host a number of businesses, 4 or 5 at the moment. That's probably going to grow through next year to be 6 or 7. And we have a few other businesses that work with us that are not actually resident in the National Robotarium. So overall, in our first year, we probably got about between 8 and 10 companies that we worked with to try and accelerate, incubate, help them grow. And our role there really is to give them a place where they can develop their product that's got the facilities that they need, not just office facilities, but also workshop facilities and labs to do testing in so that they can develop their product. But at the same time, we try and network them with industry partners that could maybe use the product, but also with investors that could help them with the finance they're going to need to be successful. And then our final bit is to try and encourage people to see robotics as a career path. So to help young people, school-age people, to think about robotics as a possible choice, but also to help the community at large understand robotics so that we can have a sensible conversation about what robotics is going to mean for everyone in the UK going forward. So with those 4 things, we're hoping that ultimately we're going to have a positive impact on the economy. We're going to see new jobs. We're going to see more productivity, which in turn will make our companies more competitive on the global stage. Will hopefully, enhance exports, and also we're going to see some societal benefits. So one of the big areas that we are focused on is healthcare and social care, and how robotics in that space is going to help with problems in the NHS, is going to help with problems at care at home for assisted living, but overall is going to move us from a situation where we're not just dependent on cheap labour to help us look after people, but we've actually got some robotics solutions in there as well. So hopefully that outlines what we're all about. My role is really to make all of that happen, is to build the team, bring the right people in, build a culture that within that team to be successful, to try and promote the National Robotarium at the same time, to get the kind of support that we need to be successful and to make it something that's sustainable for the future. I'd like to think that the National Robotarium will still be here in 20 or 30 years. Probably in 50 years we won't need it because we'll be done, but certainly over the next 10, 20 years, I'd like to think that the National Robotarium can be a big key part of what the UK needs to do.
It's really like at the forefront of nurturing the next generation of robotics companies, I guess, isn't it? As you were saying, that you act as an incubator for those partners that are housed in your building to go out and actually expand into the manufacturing and the healthcare industries, like you say.
Yeah, and to help those industries as well understand what robotics can do for them and how accessible it is. It's not, there's probably very few people sitting in boardrooms around the UK's companies who actually understand robotics. So it's useful to try and help those companies, whether it's at boardroom level or at engineering level or at middle management level, to get to grips with what robotics is about and try and demystify it and remove the barriers to adoption, while at the same time promoting, as you say, promoting the small businesses and helping them to get a leg up and get ready for hopefully scaling up and becoming an established part of the economy over the next few years as well.
It's interesting. So I'm going to start with the first question. Is the $1 million question everybody asks me when I get interviewed is, are robots going to take everybody's jobs? And it's a kind of really emotive question that people ask. But yeah, I don't know what your views are on this.
Well, I guess it's fairly straightforward, which is the benefit is going to outweigh the disruption. So particularly if we look at healthcare and social care, if we look more generally at technology changes going back in history, we could go all the way back to the wheel, and we could look at steam engines, we could look at aircraft, we could look at mobile phones, we could look at personal computing. All those technologies in the end have resulted in more people today on the planet Earth having meaningful work to do than there was previously. Yes, they've all brought a level of disruption with them. Certain roles and jobs, we don't have typists anymore, but we still have the equivalent number of people who were doing typing in, if we go back 50 years ago, doing something else. So I'm quite positive about this. I think that this is just another example of a technology which will help us to do what we want to do, whether that's to help us keep us all safe, keep us all healthy, or help us to be more productive, or help us to decommission the nuclear power stations that we've got to decommission over the next few years in the UK. Help us to do all of that. It will be a different way from the way we would have done it without robots. But someone was saying to me the other day that if robots had come first, there'd be a lot of things that they wouldn't want the humans to do. And I think it's, if you look at it from that point of view, there's a lot of things we've got humans doing today that if we had robots before, we probably wouldn't have done it that way, because, yes, it's not so great for their health, or it's, putting them in a certain dangerous situation. So I think that's a fairly long-winded answer, but I think the simple answer for me anyway is that I don't think we've got too much to worry about. I think we need to be careful about how we do it. We need a bit of legislation. We need a bit of regulation to make sure that, it's not an uncontrolled introduction of robotics. But I do think it's going to be inevitable, because I think the macroeconomic and societal pulls for the need for robotics are there, whether it's productivity for manufacturing companies or whether it's helping people who are frail or elderly living at home. Those pools are there, and the staff labour shortages that we have in those areas are there as well. So I think it's an inevitability that there's going to be a lot more robots. There will be disruption. I don't think we should shy away from that. I think everyone should be very open about that. But in the longer term, I think we come out with a much better civilization, a much better society, where we're able to concentrate on the things that humans are good at and leave the things that the machines are good at for the machines to do.
Yeah, I mean, we've always agreed that it's empowerment through technology. It's unthinkable of a world without the internet now, and how the internet's revolutionized everything that we do, business, how we buy things, how we liaise with email and so on. It's empowered us rather than holding us back.
Yeah, and I think, slightly to one side of robotics, when we look at artificial intelligence, On the one hand, artificial intelligence is helping us to do cancer screening much, much better than we ever did, and therefore helping people to live and recover from cancer. On the other hand, we're all worried about what ChatGPT might do for people cheating on exams. I don't think that's any different from any other technology that we've introduced. There's always been pros and cons, and we've found a way, I guess, sometimes through trial and error rather than through being proactive, but we've always found a way to get to grips with that. I guess if there's anything that does worry me, is government's ability to be proactive. I think we see with any introduction of technology, and I think we're seeing it right now with AI, that it's a reactive approach. The technology has to hit the headlines. The worries about the technology have to hit the headlines before we see positive action from governments. And we've seen that very much, I think, with AI over the last 6 to 12 months. I don't think robotics yet has been properly assessed. The kind of robotics that you are, for example, is involved in is not the same conversation as you would have if you're talking about a humanoid robot, or you're talking about bringing a robot into a hospital that's going to be moving around while there's patients, while there's doctors, nurses, visitors in that same space. So autonomous robotics is a different conversation, but I actually think that's where there's going to be massive growth over the next few years, because that technology is there now and it's becoming affordable. And we're seeing it in wheeled form, we're seeing it in two-legged form, we're seeing it in four-legged form. And certainly the work we're doing at the National Robotarium is dominated by autonomous systems. That's where most of the interest is coming from, the companies and organizations that we work with.
Yes, it's quite interesting, that field, isn't it? How quick it's growing, really.
Yeah.
I was got another question to ask you about how we differ. So other countries have a very different opinion or attitude to robotics. I'm thinking people like Germany or South Korea or Japan. And do you think there's any sort of cultural difference why those kind of countries would be more open to automation and robotics than the UK would?
I think it's less cultural and more economic. I think if you look at where robotics has been embraced, particularly into manufacturing, it's been, in some instances, been in countries that are trying to grow, Korea, etc. They're trying to expand, they're trying to grow, and that's a good choice for them because they start with robotics. Older economies have started with, a decent, if not vibrant economy based on no robots. So that presents a barrier because you need to convince yourself that using robots is better than what you've been successful in doing up until then. But then if you look at countries like Germany, I think they've taken, their situation is different and their attitude has been different as a result, which is it's about being competitive on the global stage. It's about productivity. It's about driving down unit costs, etc. And also enhancing the product, both in terms of its reliability and the kind of product you can build with a robot as opposed to doing it by hand. So I think for different reasons, different economies and therefore different countries look at it slightly differently. I think for the UK, I think a big part of it has been that we've relied on hands-on labour and cheap hands-on labour for far too long, and not really seen the long-term benefit and taken that long-term view to spend the money to move across to robotics. And again, go back to your other question, that doesn't mean that you're going to replace a human operator with a robot. It means that you're going to enhance your business capability by continuing with that human operator, but instead of adding another human operator, now you're going to add a robot. And that's going to bring a different dimension to your business. And I don't think enough businesses are looking at it that way. A lot of the people that I talk to have looked at it from the point of view, what do I pay a human worker? What's it going to cost me to buy a robot? That's the end of the conversation, rather than what else does a robot bring in terms of repeatability, in terms of reliability, being able to work in environments that humans don't want to work in, overcome a labour shortage, all those kind of things. But also recognising that there's an awful lot in their operation that still needs to be done by humans, because robots can't do it all. And I don't think they ever will be able to do it all. maybe in science fiction, eventually we get there.
Yes.
But I think, in a foreseeable future, there's always going to be a mix. And that's why coboting is such an important thing. And I think that's why you see a lot of companies now seeing coboting as the next step for them, whether it's we didn't have robots before, but we need a robot. Actually, let's start with a cobot, or whether it's we used to have robots, but we're now moving to coboting. So, yeah, for all of those reasons, I think different incentives and motivations in different parts of the world, but increasingly, I think an awakening in all economies to the need to move towards robotics. I think we're seeing that in spades in America. I think they're really starting to embrace it now in a way that they haven't done up until now. Well, definitely haven't done up until now. But having said that, they've not been anywhere near as backward as we have in the UK, where we just seem to have turned a blind eye to it up until now. Which, coming back to what I have to do at the National Robotarium, makes life either difficult or easy depending on how you look at it, because we're starting from a low point. So any way is up.
Yes, and there's a massive opportunity for us, isn't there? That's the thing.
Yeah,
it's a very rich environment out there to start and introduce robots into different sizes of business, and that kind of leads me on to my next question. I mean, traditionally we started selling into small manufacturing businesses in Scandinavia. Do you think it's possible for small businesses to adopt robot technology? Because traditionally we've always seen it in large manufacturing plants like car manufacturing plants and big packaging plants. But do you think there's a availability for smaller companies to use this kind of technology?
Definitely. A lot of the companies that we're working with are exactly that. They're not, your big multinationals or even your big nationals. They tend to be companies that have seen robotics, are curious about what it can do for them, but are small to medium-sized businesses. And in the UK, that's the majority of businesses that we've got, small to medium-sized. We have some big ones, but all the analysis for years and years, and it will stay the same, I think, for a long time, shows that we really need to have the adoption of robotics into those sizes of businesses. And I think the good news is that certainly for the last 12, 14 months while we've been up and running, there's been no end of inquiries around that, no end of discussions around that. So I think there's an appetite there. I think what needs to happen for that appetite to be fulfilled is really what we're trying to do. And I know, talking with you, Mark, what you're trying to do in UR is to make it easy, make it the path of least resistance. Reduce the costs to adopt robotics, not just in terms of the cost of the unit, but everything else that goes with it. Do I have to train my staff? Do I have to adapt my environment so that the robot can work in that environment? All of those are peripheral and additional costs that, when put together in a full business case, start to make it look, from a financial point of view, more difficult rather than easy. But on the other side of the equation, we can also help to people to understand what the real benefits are going to be and how it positions them competitively in a way that not having robotics in the mix of how they do their operation, maybe hinders them. So certainly the heart of what we're trying to do is develop the lowest cost, the quickest, and the lowest risk way to understanding what it means for your particular business to use robotics, whether that's using things like UR Cobot arms, or whether that's using AGRs, or whether that's using autonomous vehicles, or whatever it happens to be. But the important thing is to help, as a national UK organisation, our important thing is to help all of those businesses in an unbiased and neutral way to understand robotics and think about what they're going to do with robotics. But go back to your question, small, medium businesses, I think there is an appetite. I think they're beginning to see that it's not unaffordable. I think they're beginning to see particularly the ability to use robots for multiple jobs. So it's not one robot, one job. It's the reprogrammability and the repurposing, even within hour to hour within a workplace is something that I don't think many organizations have started started to properly appreciate and what that really means for them. So I think as they get to understand that, so the flexibility of the platforms, the ease of use, and they always ask about reliability. Making sure that they properly are happy that they're going to be reliable.
Yeah.
So just as on a sort of side note, one of the interesting conversations that we've started to have more often now is, so what is the backup plan? If I move across to robotics with my organization and then the robots stop working for whatever reason, can I revert to a manual process? And that's quite important for them to properly understand as well.
Yeah, I think that's one of the areas where cobots are useful, because they don't take up the same sort of space as an industrial robot, and they can work closer to people. If you can put them into a park position and take over that role in a manual with a manual worker if you needed to.
Exactly.
And that's the interesting thing about how the workspace is going to change, with people working more closely with automation, I think, for the future. So
yeah. And we've talked with a couple of organizations that they have to be operational. They're doing things that have to operate 24 hours, 7 days a week, because in some cases people's lives depend upon it. And so moving to robotics for them has a lot of advantages, but the one reassurance that they need is if for whatever reason the robotics solution doesn't work, they need to be able to step in with something that's able to take over. So, removing completely the capability to do the job in a different way for them isn't an answer. For other businesses, yeah, it's maybe not such a big problem. A bit of downtime is okay. But for things like blood sampling or pharmaceutical manufacture or water purity checks, etc., those kind of things, so the answer is not, well, the robot stopped working, we can't make sure everyone's safe anymore.
Yeah, it's critical, isn't it?
Yeah.
One of the areas that we've seen with quite high growth for applications this year has been in the electronics industry. And it's quite interesting, I guess, as more companies are supplying into the electric vehicle market, we're starting to see more of that being decentralized, coming back from the Far East.
Yeah.
What's your opinions on that? Do you think that robots can actually help with reshoring and give us more sustainable supply chains into the manufacturing network?
I think they're essential for reshoring, because I think if the offshore capability is robots based, then you're not going to be commercially competitive. The sums just aren't going to add up. Even if you're driven by a really good, climate change sustainability agenda to get rid of the transportation carbon footprint, you're still going to be trading that off against, I may actually say, is this the same cost or more when I bring it onshore? Now, I'm sure within those thought processes and within those equations, people are prepared to trade off that a little bit in terms of a wee bit of extra cost to be able to reduce the carbon footprint. But I think fundamentally, if you're coming from a low labor cost environment and onshoring, or you're coming from an already automated environment and onshoring, you're going to need automation. And automation these days is robotics, because if you don't automate with robotics, then you will be obsolete in a few years' time. So you need to go straight to robotics. So I think you're absolutely right. There's going to be quite a pull there. I also think, on a related note, we're seeing a lot of interest from organizations working in sustainability, using robotics for waste recycling, but also for doing tasks that reduce the overall carbon footprint of the task. So seeing the carbon footprint as being the start for the innovation, but the innovation leading them down a path where robotics is the right answer. But to go back to your question again, I think people who are looking to onshore their operations will definitely find themselves looking at robotics as being the right answer, for all the reasons I've just mentioned.
Yes, to decentralize, if you like. one of the things that we touched on earlier was about skills and the need to have people trained for this next generation of programmers. And do you think there's a need to create a new classification of skill for robot programmers to be similar to somebody who's maybe like an electrician or a mechanical fitter, rather than having to go down the university route?
Yeah, yeah. I think there's different layers. I mean, if you look at any sort of engineering-based industry, there tends to be different layers. You'll have PhD qualified researchers in that particular field. You'll have people with MSCs. You'll have people with BSCs. You'll have people with vocational training, and you'll have people who have gone into the industry with no specific training and have learned on the job. I don't think robotics is any different from that, but I do think that, going back to the point I made earlier about trying to be proactive, I think there needs to be a bit of a plan. So I could envisage a scenario where, if we take, for example, the consumer market gets flooded by imported robotics. You know, everyone's got a robotic lawnmower, everyone's got a robotic Hoover, everyone's got window cleaning robots, and they might have one or two other robots in their homes. So I'm thinking only, you know, within the next 5 years or so, everyone's starting to see robotics, just in the same way as they use dishwashers and washing machines and tumble dryers right now. If that happens, and I'm pretty sure it will, then there's going to be a need, just like there is for all those other white goods, there's going to be a need for maintenance and repair. Now, there's two ways that can be delivered. One way is that the manufacturers from abroad start setting up their own networks to do that for their own equipment here in the UK. If we look at domestic appliance market at the moment, that is met in some part that way, but it's also met by franchising, and it's also met by independence. So you will see a white van driving down the road that says, you know, domestic appliance repairs. I think in future there's going to have to be and robotics, or robotics appliance repairs.
Yeah.
So where I'm getting to is, I think there's going to be a generational need the next 10, 15, 20 years to have people who are driving white vans that say robotics repairs and maintenance. And I think there'll be more demand in terms of quantity of people at that level than there will be for PhDs, robotic coders, etc. There'll still be a need, obviously, and hopefully a growing need for that. But I think it's a pyramid, and I think there's a layer in that pyramid which needs to be fulfilled with, and I think that, you know, traditionally, again, in the UK, that's fulfilled through the further education colleges, not the higher education universities. And I think the further education colleges are going to see themselves getting dragged into robotics to build that cohort of people that can fulfill that. Because even if the way that army of people is mobilized is through the robotic manufacturers from China, Germany, US, etc., creating a footprint in the UK, they're still going to have to train those people up. So one of the big things that I'm trying to discuss with both the UK and the Scottish government is that macroeconomic impact of robotics. Whether it's something that gets done to us as a nation and we don't really see economic benefit from it, or whether it's something that we want to be very active in, not just at the university research level, not just at the design and development level, but right the way through the supply chain, including manufacturing. That's a gaping hole in the UK. We just don't manufacture in the UK in any meaningful sense around robotics. So how do we get ourselves a footprint in that, but also the service maintenance and ongoing upgrade, etc., of robotics in the UK is going to be a huge demand. So yeah, I think we do need to look very carefully where those skills come from. Within the National Robotarium, we work very much on schools outreach at the moment. We focus specifically on that in our first year to get that up and running and stabilized, because we saw that as, you know, just a glaring demand. I think our next area is going to be helping people in boardrooms actually understand robotics and make good, clear decisions about what it means for their businesses. And then the one right behind that will have to be, I think anyway, will have to be how do we train up that cohort that's at that level, the lower level in the pyramid, that's going to be able to keep everything running.
Yes. Yeah, it's an important thing, actually, you know, because there isn't a current City and Guilds course for programming robots, which is potentially something that could be on the horizon, I guess. I've got a question for you around security, cyber security. And it's a question we've been asked about in the past, about, if we do automate and we network all the robots together, is security an important thing to consider? And is that something that you've been asked about as well as your role as the Robotarium? Cyber security, for being able people to hack into something and shut it down, I suppose.
Yeah, that is a concern that a lot of companies got. It always comes up in the conversation, but it's not always brought up by the people that we're talking to. It's quite often brought up by ourselves, to try and help them understand that there's more to it than just buying a robot. But certainly, I think, again, being proactive about the whole thing, cybersecurity is something that we should be alerting the companies that are looking to bring in robotics to the need for that. Most of them, however, because they've already got computer systems, etc., should have a level of understanding around cybersecurity, albeit with robotics is maybe a slightly different flavor. And if you don't get it right, the consequences are quite a bit different. It's not, you're not just going to get ransomware. You're going to have, particularly with autonomous systems, you could have those autonomous systems moving in a way that you're out of control. So I know, for example, in discussions I've had with people who are involved in what the large logistics companies are doing, and for example, what Cado are doing and what Amazon are doing, they are acutely aware of that. Their operations could be shut down if they're not cyber secure. But even there's even less knowledge in terms of, if you are going to have autonomous robots operating in your facility, recognizing the need for reliable Wi-Fi, and not having Wi-Fi black spots, because obviously the robot stops at that point. So yes. I think for autonomous robots, less so maybe for the kind of things that you are do, but certainly for autonomous robots, cybersecurity is utmost. Because the last thing we need as a community that's interested in promoting robotics is for bad examples of robotic use to come into the public domain. Stories about rogue robots and things like that. We don't need that. So yeah, I'm always very keen to say to people that you need to be thinking very seriously about your cybersecurity before you start adopting robots, because it won't just be an impact for the individual user. Those, if we have enough of those cases, we'll start getting well, robots are dangerous, aren't they? We could do without that.
Yes, definitely. One final question: how can the government help with the robotics industry, and how can they help expand in that adoption of robots into industry in general, do you think?
There's a lot they could be doing. I've been involved just in the last week in a couple of conversations on this topic. I think there's two things. There's creating a pathway that makes it easy for companies to adopt. And what I mean by that is, if I'm running a company and I've decided that robotics is going to be part of my strategy for the future, I need to find a really easy way to do all the things we just talked about in the last half hour or so. I need to find an easy way to understand the cybersecurity, an easy way to figure out how much training I'm going to have to do for my own people, an easy way to understand how to make a decision between robot A versus robot B to come into my business, an easy way to understand how I keep it maintained and reliable, an easy way to figure out how it's going to work alongside my existing employees and what it's going to mean for the long-term future. All of those things. So it's quite a complex thing. So what government needs to be thinking about is, how do we help those companies, and you mentioned it before, Mark, not just the big ones, but the SMEs as well, to understand all of that, to be able to make the pathway for adoption smooth and straightforward. And I think there is a big part for government to play in that, and it ranges from putting the money in to build up the training capability, like I was talking about before, the further education colleges and the higher education as well, but further education in particular, to help not just people train to be the robotic maintainers of the future, but also to understand robotics enough so that they take it on in an informed and intelligent way. The other way is to really help organizations to understand the business case for robotics. Too often it's made overly simple and doesn't take into account a lot of very important factors that really should be taken into account in the decision making. I think, as I said a little bit earlier, too often the conversations that I'm having with people start with, well, I've got someone and I pay them this much a year, and if I buy a robot, what's the comparison?
Yes.
And that's far, far, far too simple conversation to be having, because robotics offers so many more benefits beyond just saving the cost of a human employee. And that's why I think the conversation around robots and humans and robots taking people's jobs is entirely the wrong conversation to be having. But again, to go back to the point, there is a huge amount for government to do, and I think a really key thing would be to stop lumping it in with artificial intelligence.
Yes.
You know, far too often you mention robots to anyone in government decision making, and they go, "Oh yeah, that's all about AI, isn't it?" And no, it is not.
No, it's different completely.
AI is software. Robots involves hardware, and AI. Yes, AI in robots makes them autonomous and makes them more useful, etc. But when they're getting all the stories about AI and they're investing in Turing Institutes and everything else, and we just heard in the last budget that we're going to put more hundreds of millions of pounds into AI. In the conversations I'm having, I don't hear an awful lot about, well, that actually a big chunk of that is assigned to robotics. It's almost as if it's been overlooked and not properly understood. Yes. So I'm always very keen when I get the opportunity to say, we need to talk about robotics, which includes some AI, but don't talk about AI as including all of robotics. So if we can change that perception, that would be great, because then we can have proper conversations about what it really means for industries, solid manufacturing, logistics industries, you know, construction industries, to agriculture, to take on this technology and really make a difference. If we don't break through that, we'll keep telling ourselves that, you know, AI algorithms is going to change the world and it'll all be, you know, fantastic.
Yeah.
But actually, there's where AI really impacts on construction, on transportation, on manufacturing industry, etc., is not anywhere near, in my view, again, not anywhere near as potent as robotics does.
Yes, exactly. It's been really interesting speaking to you today, Stewart. I appreciate your time. So that's all we've got for this week on Cobots Weekly. Join us next week when we speak to somebody else from the world of robotics.